In the 1980s, grandmas made church potluck dinners that mattered. They didn't cook fancy meals, they made quick, cheap casseroles with Velveeta, cream soups, and jello that fed crowds under 10 minutes. These potlucks might sound simple, but they fed our families. Let's rediscover these 30 forgotten 10-minute church classics that kept America connected before convenience replaced home cooking. Funeral potatoes was the 1980s church potluck legend that dominated every fellowship hall table across America. This creamy, cheesy hash brown casserole with crunchy cornflake topping became the most requested dish at Mormon gatherings and spread nationwide through potluck culture. The combination of frozen hash browns, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, and sharp cheddar created the ultimate comfort food that stayed warm for hours during long church events. Families fought over the crispy corner pieces, cost around $8 to feed 15 people, making it incredibly budget-friendly for feeding crowds. This vanished outside Utah when cream of whatever soup casseroles fell out of fashion and younger generations rejected processed convenience foods their grandmothers relied on. But you can make this today because frozen hash browns, Campbell's soups, and shredded cheese are still stocked at every grocery store. Bring this back to your next gathering and watch 3 generations bond over creamy, cheesy nostalgia they didn't know they missed desperately. Tater tot casserole was the 1980s Midwestern church potluck champion that made kids and adults equally happy. This hearty, layered casserole featured seasoned ground beef, cream of mushroom soup, mixed vegetables, shredded cheese, and a golden layer of crispy tater tots on top. The genius was in its simplicity. Everything layered raw in one pan and baked until the tots turned golden and crunchy while the beef cooked through. Church basement ovens across the Midwest baked dozens of these every Sunday. Cost around $10 to feed 15 people using budget-friendly ground beef and frozen tater tots. This disappeared when ground beef casseroles became associated with bland 1980s cooking and health-conscious families stopped serving cream soup-based dishes regularly. But you can make this today because Ore-Ida tater tots, Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and ground beef are available at every supermarket nationwide. Bring this to a potluck and watch it disappear faster than anything else on the table, just like it did 40 years ago. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Green bean casserole was the 1980s Thanksgiving and potluck staple that appeared at literally every church gathering without fail. This iconic casserole combined canned green beans, cream of mushroom soup, milk, and French's fried onions into a creamy, crunchy side dish that defined American comfort food. The Campbell's Soup Company created this recipe in 1955, but it reached peak popularity during the 1980s when it became mandatory at every holiday table and fellowship hall spread. The crispy fried onion topping provided textural contrast that made plain green beans exciting and craveable. Cost around $6 to feed 15 people using affordable canned ingredients. This never completely vanished, but became less popular when fresh vegetable sides replaced canned convenience foods and younger hosts preferred roasted vegetables over cream soup casseroles. But you can make this today because canned green beans, Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and French's crispy fried onions remain grocery store staples available year-round nationwide. This classic still belongs on every holiday and potluck table. Before we continuing, chicken hash brown casserole was the 1980s church potluck main dish that fed entire congregations without breaking anyone's budget. This hearty one-pan meal layered frozen shredded hash browns with cooked chicken, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, and loads of cheddar cheese baked until golden and bubbly. The beauty was its flexibility. You could use leftover rotisserie chicken, canned chicken, or even turkey after holidays. Church ladies loved this because it traveled well in disposable aluminum pans and stayed warm during long fellowship gatherings. Cost around $12 to feed 15 people, making it one of the more expensive potluck dishes, but still incredibly economical per serving. This vanished when cream soup casseroles fell from grace and families stopped buying giant bags of frozen hash browns regularly. But you can make this today because frozen hash browns, rotisserie chickens, cream soups, and sour cream fill every grocery store's refrigerated and frozen sections. Bring back this filling crowd pleaser that everyone secretly misses. Cheesy cauliflower casserole was the 1980s church potluck vegetable dish that actually tasted good enough for children to eat willingly. This creamy side dish transformed bland cauliflower into cheesy comfort food by smothering florets in sharp cheddar cheese sauce made with cream soup, butter, and paprika for color. The cheese completely masked the cauliflower flavor while adding nutrition that mothers appreciated and kids tolerated. Church potlucks needed vegetable dishes, and this golden, bubbly casserole satisfied that requirement while actually getting eaten instead of left behind on plates. Cost around $7 to feed 15 people using affordable frozen cauliflower and inexpensive cheddar cheese. This disappeared when low-carb diets made cauliflower trendy in rice and pizza crust forms, and families stopped making cream-based vegetable casseroles their grandmothers loved. But you can make this today because frozen cauliflower, cream of chicken soup, and shredded cheddar cheese remain readily available at every supermarket. Resurrect this cheesy vegetable side that made kids eat their vegetables without complaints or battles. These 5 church potluck classics defined 1980s fellowship hall tables: funeral potatoes, tater tot casserole, green bean casserole, chicken hash brown bake, and cheesy cauliflower. Every dish fed crowds for under $12 and brought communities together. They vanished when tastes changed. The next 5 prove 1980s potluck creativity was unmatched. Sweet potato casserole was the 1980s church potluck dessert disguised as side dish that everyone secretly loved. This sweet, crunchy topped casserole transformed mashed sweet potatoes with brown sugar, butter, eggs, and vanilla into a dish closer to dessert than vegetable. The marshmallow or pecan topping provided sweetness and crunch that made it irresistible at Thanksgiving and Easter potlucks. Southern churches made this mandatory at every holiday gathering where it competed with actual desserts for popularity. The debate between marshmallow versus pecan topping divided congregations into passionate camps. Cost around $9 to feed 15 people using affordable canned sweet potatoes and brown sugar. This never completely vanished, but became less common when health-conscious families questioned serving candy sweet vegetables at dinner and younger cooks preferred savory sweet potato preparations. But you can make this today because canned sweet potatoes, marshmallows, pecans, and brown sugar remain supermarket staples available year-round. Bring back this sweet tradition that made vegetables feel like celebration food instead of obligation. Corn casserole was the 1980s church potluck side dish that tasted like cornbread but came together in minutes without kneading or rising. This sweet, custard-like casserole combined canned whole kernel corn, cream-style corn, Jiffy corn muffin mix, sour cream, and melted butter into a golden, slightly sweet side that paired perfectly with any main dish. The texture fell somewhere between cornbread and pudding, creating unique comfort food appeal. Church potlucks loved this because it required zero skill and pleased everyone from toddlers to great-grandmothers. Cost around $6 to feed 15 people using pantry staples and 1 box of Jiffy mix. This never fully disappeared, but became less popular when from-scratch cooking replaced convenience mixes and families stopped buying Jiffy corn muffin mix regularly. But you can make this today because canned corn, Jiffy mix, and sour cream fill every grocery store's shelves and remain incredibly affordable. Resurrect this foolproof side dish that guarantees compliments without effort or advanced cooking skills required. Broccoli rice casserole with Velveeta was the 1980s church potluck vegetable and starch combination that solved the side dish dilemma in one pan. This creamy, cheesy casserole mixed frozen broccoli florets, white rice, cream of mushroom soup, and cubed Velveeta cheese into a gooey, kid-friendly dish that made broccoli tolerable for picky eaters. The Velveeta melted into impossibly smooth cheese sauce that coated every grain of rice and piece of broccoli. Church potlucks relied on this because it combined vegetable and starch requirements into one easy-to-transport dish. Cost around $8 to feed 15 people using affordable frozen broccoli and budget Velveeta. This vanished almost completely when Velveeta became unfashionable and families rejected processed cheese foods for real cheese and fresh vegetables. But you can make this today because Velveeta, frozen broccoli, cream of mushroom soup, and rice remain grocery store staples despite changing food trends.
Bring back this nostalgic side dish that reminds people why processed cheese foods dominated 1980s potlucks without apology. King Ranch chicken was the 1980s Texas church potluck queen that spread across the South through fellowship hall recipe exchanges. This layered Tex-Mex casserole stacked torn corn tortillas with shredded chicken, cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup, rotel tomatoes with green chiles, and loads of cheddar cheese, creating southwestern lasagna-style comfort food.
The combination of creamy soups with spicy rotel and melted cheese created addictive flavor that made people scrape the pan for every last bite. Cost around $15 to feed 15 people, making it pricier than other potluck dishes, but worth every penny for special occasions. This disappeared outside Texas when Tex-Mex cooking evolved beyond cream soup casseroles and younger cooks preferred authentic Mexican flavors over Americanized versions. But you can make this today because corn tortillas, rotel, cream soups, and shredded cheese are widely available at supermarkets nationwide, even outside the South. Bring back this legendary Tex-Mex casserole that defined 1980s Southern church potluck excellence. Chicken spaghetti casserole was the 1980s church potluck pasta dish that competed with lasagna for popularity at every covered dish supper. This comforting casserole combined cooked spaghetti with diced chicken, cream of mushroom soup, rotel tomatoes, diced bell peppers, onions, and sharp cheddar cheese baked until bubbly and golden on top. The rotel added southwestern kick that made plain chicken and pasta exciting and memorable. Church ladies made giant pans of this in disposable aluminum containers that traveled well and fed crowds economically. Cost around $10 to feed 15 people using leftover chicken and budget pasta. This vanished when cream soup-based casseroles became outdated and families preferred Italian-style pasta dishes with marinara sauce over Americanized cream-based versions. But you can make this today because spaghetti, rotel, cream of mushroom soup, and cheddar cheese remain pantry and refrigerator staples at every grocery store. Revive this creamy, spicy comfort food that defined 1980s Southern church potluck tables and brought communities together over shared meals. These 10 church potluck classics showcase 1980s Fellowship Hall cooking at its finest: sweet potato casserole, corn casserole, broccoli rice with Velveeta, King Ranch chicken, and chicken spaghetti. Every dish cost under $15 and brought congregations together. Taco casserole with Doritos was the 1980s church potluck phenomenon that made Tex-Mex accessible to small-town congregations across America who'd never tasted authentic Mexican food. This genius layered casserole used crushed nacho cheese Doritos as the base and topping, creating a crunchy shell around seasoned ground beef, refried beans, sour cream, salsa, shredded lettuce, diced tomatoes, and mountains of melted cheddar cheese. The Doritos eliminated the need for taco shells or tortilla chips while adding concentrated cheese flavor that kids and adults equally loved. Church potlucks embraced this because it looked festive, tasted exciting, and could be assembled in disposable pans that didn't require returning. The combination of familiar Doritos with taco seasonings made adventurous eating feel safe for conservative Midwestern church members. Cost around $12 to feed 15 people using affordable ground beef, a bag of Doritos, and canned beans. This vanished when authentic Mexican restaurants opened in small towns, and Doritos casseroles seemed embarrassingly Americanized and unsophisticated compared to real tacos and enchiladas. But you can make this today because Doritos, ground beef, taco seasoning packets, refried beans, and shredded cheese remain grocery staples nationwide. Bring back this crunchy, cheesy crowd-pleaser that defined 1980s Tex-Mex church potluck creativity before food snobbery made people ashamed of using Doritos in casseroles. Walking tacos was the 1980s church potluck genius that solved the serving dilemma for youth group gatherings and outdoor fellowship events where tables, chairs, and proper plates were impractical or unavailable. This brilliant concept used individual single-serve bags of Fritos or Doritos as edible bowls. You opened each bag from the top, added a scoop of seasoned taco meat, still warm from the slow cooker, then piled on shredded cheddar cheese, a dollop of sour cream, shredded iceberg lettuce, diced tomatoes and salsa directly into the chip bag, handed the person a plastic fork, and let them eat straight from the bag without any plates, bowls, or cleanup required. The portable, self-contained format made serving large crowds incredibly easy with minimal mess and virtually zero cleanup afterward, since everything was disposable. Youth pastors absolutely loved walking tacos because teenagers could eat while playing volleyball, basketball, or socializing without needing to sit down at tables. And the interactive assembly line format turned dinner into a fun activity. Church potlucks used them for outdoor summer events where wind would blow paper plates away and picnic tables were already full. It cost around $15 to feed 20 people in the 1980s by buying individual chip bags in bulk at warehouse stores and making one large batch of seasoned ground beef taco meat in a slow cooker. This never completely disappeared but became less common when concerns about processed foods and single-use packaging made individual chip bags seem wasteful and environmentally irresponsible. But you can make walking tacos today because individual Fritos and Doritos bags, ground beef, Old El Paso taco seasoning packets, and fresh toppings remain available at every grocery store and Costco. Bobbick Little Smokies was the 1980s church potluck appetizer that everyone secretly loved despite its bizarre ingredient combination that sounded completely wrong but tasted incredibly, addictively right once you tried it. This simple recipe combined one package of Hillshire Farm Little Smokies cocktail sausages with one jar of Welch's grape jelly and one bottle of Heinz chili sauce or barbecue sauce in a slow cooker set on low, stirring occasionally until the jelly melted and created a sweet, tangy glaze that coated each mini sausage in sticky, delicious sauce. The grape jelly provided sweetness that balanced the savory sausage while the chili sauce added tang and slight heat, creating unexpectedly complex flavor that completely belied the embarrassingly simple two-ingredient sauce. Church potlucks always had at least 3 competing slow cookers filled with these sitting on the appetizer table, where people stood around eating them by the toothpick full, unable to stop despite feeling slightly guilty about how many they consumed. The sweet-savory combination became genuinely addictive, and people couldn't quit eating them even after learning the ingredient list and realizing grape jelly seemed like a ridiculous thing to put on meat. It cost around $8 to make appetizers for 15 to 20 people in the 1980s using affordable cocktail sausages on sale and pantry staples like grape jelly. Bobic little smokies vanished from modern potlucks when food became Instagram-worthy and serving grape jelly meatballs seemed embarrassingly lowbrow and unsophisticated compared to charcuterie boards, prosciutto-wrapped melon, and artisan cheese spreads that cost 3 times as much. But you can make this today because Little Smokies, Welch's grape jelly, and Heinz chili sauce remain supermarket staples that haven't changed formulas in 40 years. Velveeta cheese dip was the 1980s church potluck appetizer that started every fellowship gathering and never ever had leftovers to take home afterward because people scraped the slow cooker completely clean before anyone left the building. This impossibly smooth, never-grainy cheese dip combined 1 block of cubed Velveeta cheese with 1 can of Rotel diced tomatoes and green chilies heated together in a slow cooker on low until the Velveeta melted completely into liquid gold perfection that stayed smooth and creamy for hours, without breaking or separating. The Velveeta's sodium citrate emulsifiers created silky texture that real cheese could never achieve, while the Rotel added fresh tomato flavor and mild chile heat that balanced the rich, salty cheese and prevented it from tasting one-dimensional. Church members stood around the slow cooker shamelessly double-dipping tortilla chips until the pot was scraped completely clean, and someone always asked for the recipe even though it was literally 2 ingredients. The genius of this dip was its absolutely foolproof nature. Velveeta never broke, separated, or became grainy like real cheese dips made with cheddar or American cheese, and it stayed perfectly smooth for hours at potluck temperature without becoming oily, stringy, or congealed. It cost around $6 to make dip for 15 people in the 1980s using 1 Velveeta loaf and 1 Rotel can. Velveeta cheese dip vanished from many modern potlucks when food snobs declared Velveeta wasn't real cheese and health-conscious families switched to restaurant-style queso made with actual shredded cheese that required constant stirring and often separated into greasy messes that nobody wanted to eat. But you can make this today because Velveeta and Rotel remain grocery staples found in every supermarket that produce reliably perfect dip every single time. 7-layer dip was the 1980s church potluck showstopper that looked genuinely impressive and professional but required absolutely 0 cooking skills, no oven time, and no stovetop work to assemble perfectly in just 10 minutes. This Instagram-worthy, before Instagram existed, dip-layered refried beans spread smooth on the bottom, sour cream mixed with taco seasoning for the 2nd layer, mashed avocados or store-bought guacamole for the 3rd layer, chunky salsa for the 4th layer, shredded Mexican blend cheese for the 5th layer, sliced black olives for the 6th layer, and diced fresh tomatoes and sliced green onions for the 7th and final layer, all assembled in a clear glass 9 by 13-inch dish that displayed all the colorful, distinct layers beautifully when viewed from the side. The visual appeal made it feel like special occasion food, even though assembly took only 10 minutes of spreading ingredients in careful sequence and required 0 culinary technique beyond opening cans and spreading layers evenly with a spatula. Church potlucks loved 7-layer dip because it served crowds easily, looked professional and impressive on the table, traveled well covered with plastic wrap, and could be made several hours ahead without losing quality, appearance, or freshness. The layers created built-in flavor variety, so every tortilla chip scoop tasted slightly different depending on which layers you managed to penetrate and scoop up together. Layers created built-in flavor variety, so every tortilla chip scoop tasted slightly different depending on which layers you managed to penetrate and scoop up together. It cost around $10 to make appetizer for 15 to 20 people in the 1980s, using mostly affordable canned ingredients like refried beans, sour cream, jarred salsa, pre-shredded cheese, canned olives, and one avocado. Seven-layer dip never completely vanished, but became less popular when fresh, chunky guacamole replaced the thin mashed avocado layer, and people demanded more authentic Mexican flavors. These 15 church potluck classics showcase 1980s Fellowship Hall excellence: Dorito casseroles, walking tacos, grape jelly meatballs, Velveeta dip, and seven-layer dip. Every dish brought communities together over bold flavors and clever shortcuts. They vanished when food became sophisticated. The final 15 prove 1980s potluck creativity solved real problems deliciously. Ham and cheese. Funeral sandwiches was the 1980s church potluck main course that fed grieving families and celebration crowds with equal effectiveness, because these genius slider-style sandwiches layered thinly sliced deli ham and Swiss cheese on connected Hawaiian sweet rolls, then got brushed with melted butter mixed with Dijon mustard, Worcestershire sauce, dried minced onion, and poppy seeds, before baking until the rolls turned golden and the cheese melted throughout, creating an addictive sweet-savory flavor combination that nobody could resist. The sweet Hawaiian rolls contrasted beautifully with the savory ham and tangy butter sauce, making every bite rich, buttery, and satisfying. Church ladies made full sheet pans of these for funeral luncheons, graduation parties, wedding showers, and Sunday potlucks, because they traveled well in foil-covered pans, served crowds effortlessly, and could be assembled completely ahead of time, then baked just before serving so they came out hot and fresh. Pineapple casserole was the 1980s Southern Church potluck mystery dish that confused first-time tasters but converted them into believers after one bite of the strange, sweet, savory, crunchy perfection that shouldn't work but absolutely did for reasons food science couldn't fully explain. This controversial side dish combined canned pineapple chunks drained well, shredded sharp cheddar cheese, granulated sugar, all-purpose flour to bind everything together, and a buttery crushed Ritz cracker, topping into something that divided congregations into passionate defenders and horrified skeptics who questioned why anyone would combine fruit and cheese in a savory casserole context. The sweet pineapple paired with sharp cheddar created fascinating flavor tension that kept your taste buds interested, while the Ritz crackers added essential buttery crunch on top. Southern church potlucks considered pineapple casserole mandatory at Easter and Christmas dinners, where it sat alongside baked ham, creating a classic sweet-savory pairing that Southerners understood instinctively. The eternal debate over whether this was a side dish or a dessert divided congregations into camps that defended their position with the same vigor they reserved for debating hymn selections and potluck table arrangements. It cost around $7 to feed 15 people in the 1980s using 2 cans of pineapple chunks, 1 block of Kraft sharp cheddar, and 1 sleeve of Ritz crackers. This vanished almost completely from modern potlucks when younger generations rejected sweet casseroles as weird, questioned the combination of pineapple and cheddar cheese, and stopped making recipes their grandmothers swore by. Cheesy zucchini casserole was the 1980s church potluck vegetable solution for summer gardens that produced more zucchini than any family could possibly eat fresh before the squash grew to baseball bat size and became too tough and seedy to use for anything except compost or doorstops. This cheesy vegetable bake transformed sliced zucchini with shredded cheddar cheese, grated Parmesan, minced garlic, beaten eggs to bind everything, and a buttery Ritz cracker topping into something children actually ate without complaints, negotiations, or bribery required. The cheese completely dominated zucchini's naturally bland flavor, while the eggs created a custard-like binding texture that held the casserole together and made it sliceable instead of watery. Church potlucks during July and August featured multiple competing versions of this casserole as gardeners desperately tried to give away their excess zucchini to anyone willing to take it home, and bringing cheesy zucchini casserole to potluck was a socially acceptable way to use up the surplus without admitting your garden had overwhelmed your family's vegetable consumption capacity. Ambrosia salad was the 1980s church potluck dessert salad hybrid that blurred the line between side dish and sweet treat, confusing proper potluck table positioning but delighting taste buds with its fluffy, pastel-colored, marshmallow-studded nostalgia that tasted exactly like childhood celebrations and holiday gatherings. This retro fruit salad combined canned mandarin oranges, drained well, canned pineapple chunks, halved maraschino cherries for color, mini marshmallows, shredded sweetened coconut, and Cool Whip folded together into a cloud-like texture that was simultaneously creamy, chewy, and refreshing. The Cool Whip bound everything into a fluffy consistency while the marshmallows added pleasant chew, and the coconut provided tropical flavor that made the salad feel special and festive. Southern church potlucks typically placed ambrosia salad on dessert tables alongside cakes and pies, while Midwestern churches served it as a side dish next to casseroles and ham, creating passionate regional confusion about proper categorization that sometimes sparked friendly debates. Strawberry pretzel. Jell-O salad was the 1980s church potluck triple-layer architectural masterpiece that required assembly time, but absolutely no actual cooking skills, to create a stunning presentation that looked far more impressive than the effort required. This beautiful achievement layered a buttery crushed pretzel crust on the bottom, a sweet cream cheese and Cool Whip middle layer, and a strawberry Jell-O top studded with frozen strawberries, creating sweet, salty, creamy, crunchy complexity in every spoonful that kept people coming back for seconds. The pretzel crust provided essential salt and satisfying crunch that contrasted perfectly with the sweet, smooth cream cheese layer and the fruity, jiggly Jell-O top. Church ladies brought this to special occasions like Easter, Mother's Day, and anniversary celebrations because it looked genuinely impressive when served in clear glass 9 by 13-inch dishes that displayed all three distinct, colorful layers like edible stained glass. These 20 church potluck classics prove 1980s fellowship halls served creative, crowd-pleasing food, funeral sandwiches, pineapple casserole, zucchini bake, ambrosia salad, and strawberry pretzel Jell-O. Every dish brought communities together over bold flavors and smart shortcuts. They vanished when tastes changed. The final 10 show the sweetest potluck memories. Broccoli grape pasta salad was the 1980s church potluck cold side dish that confused newcomers but delighted regulars who grew up eating sweet and savory combinations that made perfect sense in fellowship halls across America. The recipe dumped cooked elbow macaroni or rotini pasta into a large bowl, added raw broccoli florets cut into bite-sized pieces, halved red seedless grapes, crumbled crispy bacon, shredded sharp cheddar cheese, and finely diced red onion. Then tossed everything together with a creamy dressing, made from mayonnaise, sugar, and a splash of apple cider vinegar. The sweetness from the grapes balanced the sharpness of the cheddar, the crunch of the raw broccoli contrasted with the soft pasta, and the bacon added smoky, salty depth that tied the whole dish together. It cost around $8 to feed 15 people in the 1980s. Pasta was cheap, broccoli was affordable, grapes were seasonal but inexpensive, bacon was a small amount for flavor, and mayo was a pantry staple. Moms loved this recipe because it required zero cooking beyond boiling the pasta, no oven time, no stovetop monitoring, just chopping, mixing, and chilling in the refrigerator until potluck time. The salad traveled well in a covered bowl, stayed fresh for hours at room temperature during church events, and never needed reheating, making it the perfect contribution when you were already bringing a hot casserole or dessert. But back then, broccoli grape pasta salad was the bright, colorful, refreshing side dish that disappeared within minutes, leaving behind an empty bowl and requests for the recipe from anyone who tasted it for the first time and realized that grapes, broccoli, and bacon belonged together after all. Texas sheetcake was the 1980s church potluck chocolate dessert that fed crowds effortlessly because it baked in a single jelly roll pan, required no frosting skill, and tasted incredibly moist and fudgy even hours after cooling, making it the ultimate dump and transport cake. For busy moms who needed dessert that traveled well and pleased everyone. The recipe started by dumping flour, sugar, and a pinch of salt into a large bowl, then heating butter, cocoa powder, and water in a saucepan until it boiled, pouring that hot mixture over the dry ingredients, adding eggs, buttermilk, baking soda, and vanilla, stirring just until combined. Then pouring the thin batter onto a greased-rimmed baking sheet and baking at 375 degrees for 20 minutes until the cake was set but still soft. While the cake baked, moms made the signature warm chocolate icing by heating butter, cocoa, and milk in a saucepan until it boiled, then removing it from heat and stirring in powdered sugar and vanilla until smooth and glossy. The moment the cake came out of the oven, they poured the hot icing over the hot cake, spreading it gently with a spatula so the icing soaked into the top layer, creating that signature moist, fudgy texture that made Texas sheetcake so addictive. It cost around $8 to feed 24 people in the 1980s. Flour, sugar, cocoa, butter, eggs, and buttermilk were all affordable pantry staples, and the thin sheet format stretched ingredients further than layer cakes ever could. Moms loved this recipe because it required no mixer, no fancy pans, no frosting technique, and no decorating skill. Just dump, stir, bake, and ice. While hot, the cake traveled perfectly in its own baking pan covered with foil, stayed moist for days, and tasted rich and chocolatey without being overly sweet or dense. Kids loved it because every slice had equal amounts of cake and icing, and the fudgy texture felt like eating brownies and cake at the same time. This dessert disappeared from modern potlucks because homemade cakes lost ground to bakery sheet cakes and cupcakes. Cocoa-based recipes seemed less impressive than flourless chocolate tortes and molten lava cakes, and younger cooks stopped baking simple sheet cakes in favor of Instagram-worthy layered desserts. But in the 1980s, Texas sheet cake was the chocolate dessert that never failed, never lasted, and always prompted someone to ask for the recipe, even though everyone already had the same photocopied card tucked into their church cookbook. Dump cake was the 1980s church potluck dessert miracle that required zero mixing, zero skill, and zero patience, because you literally dumped canned pie filling into a baking dish, dumped dry cake mix on top, sliced butter over the whole thing, and baked it until the top turned golden and crispy while the fruit bubbled underneath, creating a warm, cobbler-like dessert that tasted homemade even though it took less than 10 minutes to assemble. The most popular versions used cherry pie filling or crushed pineapple, though cooks experimented with blueberry, apple, and peach, depending on what was on sale at the grocery store. The recipe was almost too simple to believe. Open 2 cans of cherry pie filling and spread them evenly in a 9 by 13-inch baking dish. Sprinkle 1 box of yellow cake mix directly over the fruit without stirring or adding eggs or oil or water. Slice 1 stick of cold butter into thin pats and arrange them across the top of the dry cake mix. Then bake at 350 degrees for 45 to 50 minutes until the butter melted down through the cake mix, forming crispy golden patches on top while the fruit filling bubbled up around the edges. The result was a dessert that combined the texture of cobbler with the sweetness of cake, served warm with vanilla ice cream or whipped cream. It cost around $6 to feed 15 people in the 1980s. Canned pie filling was inexpensive. Cake mix was $1 or less. And butter was the only semi-expensive ingredient. Moms loved dump cake because it required no measuring, no mixing bowls, no electric mixer, no recipe skills, and no chance of failure. You couldn't overmix it because you didn't mix it at all. The dish traveled well, reheated beautifully, and tasted just as good cold the next day for breakfast. Kids loved it because the fruit was sweet and the cake mix topping tasted like cookie crumbles, and adults loved it because it felt fancy enough for company but easy enough for a weeknight. Dump cake disappeared from modern potlucks because convenience desserts fell out of favor. Boxed cake mixes became associated with lazy cooking, and food culture shifted toward made-from-scratch baking that required skill and time. But in the 1980s, dump cake was the dessert that saved dinner, impressed guests, and proved that sometimes the simplest recipes were the most delicious. Church basement bars was the 1980s church potluck dessert category that covered dozens of similar recipes: lemon bars, brownies, dream bars, Hello Dolly bars, magic bars, 7-layer bars, all baked in rectangular pans, cut into squares, and served directly from foil-lined. Baking dishes that traveled easily and required no plates or forks, making them the perfect finger food dessert for crowded fellowship halls where dessert tables sagged under the weight of 20 different bar cookies brought by 20 different moms. The most iconic version was the Magic Bar, also called 7-layer bar or Hello Dolly bar, which started by pressing graham cracker crumbs mixed with melted butter into the bottom of a 9 by 13-inch pan to form a firm crust, then layering sweetened condensed milk over the crust, sprinkling chocolate chips across the milk, adding butterscotch chips on top of the chocolate, scattering sweetened shredded coconut over the chips, sprinkling chopped pecans or walnuts across the coconut, then baking at 350 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and the condensed milk bubbled up around the edges, binding all the layers together into a chewy, gooey, crunchy bar cookie that sliced cleanly when cool. The recipe required zero mixing, zero creaming of butter and sugar, zero beating of eggs, just layering ingredients in order and letting the oven do the work. It cost around $7 to make 24 bars in the 1980s. Graham crackers were cheap. Condensed milk was under $2. Chocolate chips and butterscotch chips were affordable. Coconut and nuts added texture without breaking the budget. Moms loved church basement bars because they baked quickly, cooled quickly, sliced neatly, and satisfied every dessert craving: chocolate, butterscotch, coconut, and nuts, all in one bite. Crock-pot pulled pork was the 1980s church potluck main dish that saved the day when you needed to feed 20 people without standing over a stove, because you dumped a pork shoulder roast into the slow cooker in the morning, poured bottled barbecue sauce over it, turned the dial to low, and walked away for 8 hours while the pork cooked itself into tender, shreddable perfection that filled sandwich buns and satisfied hungry crowds. The recipe was almost embarrassingly simple. Buy a 3 to 4 pound pork shoulder or pork butt roast. Trim off excess fat if you wanted, but most moms didn't bother. Place the roast in a 6-quart crock pot. Pour 1 to 2 bottles of your favorite barbecue sauce over the meat until it was mostly covered. Add a splash of apple cider vinegar and a tablespoon of brown sugar if you wanted extra tang and sweetness. Put the lid on, set the cooker to low, and leave it alone for 8 to 10 hours while you went to church, ran errands, or prepared the rest of the potluck meal. When you returned, the pork would be fall-apart tender, the fat would have rendered into the sauce, and the meat would shred effortlessly with 2 forks into juicy, smoky, saucy pulled pork ready to pile onto soft hamburger buns with coleslaw and pickles. It cost around $15 to feed 20 people in the 1980s. Pork shoulder was one of the cheapest cuts of meat. Broccoli grape pasta salad, Texas sheetcake, dump cake, pork fed entire congregations for under $15 each. They vanished when homemade cooking lost ground to store-bought convenience, but their simplicity and flavor deserve a comeback. Sloppy Joes for a crowd was the 1980s church potluck main dish that every kid looked forward to because the messy, sweet, and tangy ground beef sauce soaked into soft hamburger buns and dripped down your fingers, making it impossible to eat neatly, but absolutely delicious every single time. The recipe scaled up effortlessly. Brown 3 pounds of ground beef in a large skillet or Dutch oven, drain the fat, then dump in 1 large can of tomato sauce. Half a cup of ketchup, a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of yellow mustard, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, a teaspoon of garlic powder, salt and pepper. Stir everything together and simmer on low for 15 to 20 minutes until the sauce thickened and the flavors melded into that classic sweet, tangy, slightly smoky Sloppy Joe flavor that tasted exactly like childhood. The mixture stayed warm in a slow cooker set to low, and moms served it buffet style with a stack of hamburger buns, a ladle, and a roll of paper towels because everyone knew Sloppy Joes lived up to their name. It cost around $12 to feed 20 people in the 1980s. Ground beef was affordable, especially when bought in bulk, and the sauce ingredients were pantry staples that cost pennies per serving. Moms loved Sloppy Joes because the recipe was impossible to mess up, endlessly forgiving if you added too much ketchup or not enough sugar, and universally popular with kids who refused to eat anything else at potlucks. The dish traveled well because the meat mixture stayed hot in a crock-pot or insulated carrier, and leftovers reheated beautifully the next day. Kids loved Sloppy Joes because they tasted like a slightly sweet version of a hamburger. The sauce was fun to eat even when it dripped everywhere, and no one expected you to eat it neatly. Adults loved Sloppy Joes because they were filling, inexpensive, and nostalgic, reminding them of their own childhood church potlucks and school cafeteria lunches. Sloppy Joes disappeared from some modern potlucks because ground beef became associated with unhealthy eating. Sweet tomato-based sauces fell out of favor with food snobs who preferred artisanal barbecue, and younger generations stopped making recipes their grandmothers considered classics. Baked ziti was the 1980s church potluck Italian casserole that fed crowds without requiring any special cooking skills because you boiled ziti pasta, mixed it with jarred marinara sauce and ricotta cheese, dumped the whole thing into a foil pan, topped it with shredded mozzarella, and baked it until the cheese melted and bubbled, creating a crowd-pleasing, budget-friendly, make-ahead meal that traveled well and reheated perfectly. The recipe started by boiling 1 pound of ziti pasta until just al dente, then draining it and returning it to the pot, adding 1 large jar of marinara sauce, 1 container of ricotta cheese, half a cup of grated Parmesan, a beaten egg to bind the ricotta, and Italian seasoning, stirring everything together until the pasta was evenly coated, then transferring the mixture to a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish, spreading it evenly and covering the top with 2 cups of shredded mozzarella cheese and an extra sprinkle of Parmesan. Some moms added cooked Italian sausage or ground beef to the sauce for extra protein, while others kept it vegetarian to accommodate everyone at the potluck. The dish baked at 375 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes until the cheese melted and the edges bubbled, then rested for 5 minutes before serving so the layers set and the slices held together. It cost around $10 to feed 15 people in the 1980s. Pasta was cheap, jarred sauce was affordable, ricotta and mozzarella were inexpensive compared to other proteins, and the dish stretched easily by adding more pasta or sauce. Moms loved baked ziti because it could be assembled the night before, refrigerated, and baked the next day right before the potluck, saving time and stress on busy mornings. The dish traveled well in disposable foil pans, stayed warm for hours if wrapped in towels, and reheated beautifully in the oven or microwave. Kids loved baked ziti because it tasted like pizza and lasagna combined. The cheese was gooey and stretchy, and the pasta was soft and comforting. Adults loved it because it was filling, satisfying, and universally liked by picky eaters and adventurous eaters alike. Baked ziti never fully disappeared from potlucks. It remains a staple at Italian-American gatherings, church suppers, and family reunions, but it lost its 1980s ubiquity as people shifted toward fancier pasta dishes, gluten-free alternatives, and lighter Mediterranean flavors that didn't rely on heavy cheese and tomato sauce. Cheesy cabbage casserole was the 1980s church potluck vegetable side dish that converted cabbage haters into believers because the mild, slightly sweet cabbage was smothered in a creamy cheese sauce made from cream of mushroom soup, sour cream, and shredded cheddar. Then topped with buttery Ritz cracker crumbs and baked until golden and bubbly, transforming a humble, inexpensive vegetable into a rich, comforting casserole that disappeared from serving tables within minutes. The recipe started by chopping one medium head of green cabbage into bite-sized pieces, boiling the cabbage in salted water for 5 to 7 minutes until just tender but not mushy, then draining it well and transferring it to a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish. In a separate bowl, moms mixed 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, 1 cup of sour cream, 1 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, salt and pepper. Then poured that creamy mixture over the cooked cabbage, stirring gently to coat every piece. For the topping, they crushed 1 sleeve of Ritz crackers, mixed the crumbs with melted butter, and sprinkled the buttery crumbs evenly over the casserole before baking at 350 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes until the top was golden brown and the edges bubbled. It cost around $6 to feed 15 people in the 1980s. Cabbage was one of the cheapest vegetables available year-round. Cream of mushroom soup was $1 or less, sour cream and cheddar were affordable, and Ritz crackers were a pantry staple. Moms loved cheesy cabbage casserole because it used inexpensive ingredients, required minimal prep time, and made a large quantity that fed crowds easily. The dish traveled well, reheated without losing texture, and tasted rich and indulgent despite being mostly vegetables. Kids loved it because the cheese and crackers masked the cabbage flavor, making it taste more like comfort food than health food. Adults loved it because it was filling, satisfying, and reminded them of home-cooked meals from their own childhoods. Cheesy cabbage casserole disappeared from modern potlucks because cabbage fell out of favor as a fashionable vegetable. French onion, chicken, and rice was the 1980s church potluck one-pan wonder that combined bone-in chicken pieces, raw long-grain rice, cream of mushroom soup, French onion soup mix, and water into a single baking dish, then baked everything together until the chicken turned golden, the rice absorbed all the savory liquid, and the onion soup mix infused every bite with rich caramelized flavor that tasted far more sophisticated than the simple ingredient list suggested. The recipe was almost foolproof. Spread 2 cups of raw long-grain white rice evenly across the bottom of a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish. Mix 1 can of cream of mushroom soup with 1 packet of Lipton French onion soup mix and 2½ cups of water. Pour that mixture over the rice. Lay 6 to 8 bone-in chicken thighs or drumsticks skin side up on top of the rice. Sprinkle a little paprika and black pepper over the chicken for color. Cover the dish tightly with foil and bake at 350 degrees for 1½ hours, removing the foil for the last 15 minutes so the chicken skin crisped up and turned golden brown. The result was tender, flavorful chicken with crispy skin, perfectly cooked rice that soaked up all the savory juices from the chicken and the soup mixture, and a dish that looked and tasted like it required far more effort than 10 minutes of assembly. It cost around $12 to feed 15 people in the 1980s. Chicken thighs and drumsticks were inexpensive. Rice was cheap. Cream of mushroom soup was $1, and French onion soup mix was less than $1 per packet. Moms loved French onion chicken and rice because it was a complete meal in one pan, protein, starch, and flavor, all cooked together with zero babysitting required. The dish traveled well covered with foil, stayed warm for hours, and reheated beautifully without drying out. Kids loved it because the chicken was juicy and the rice was soft and flavorful. French onion chicken and rice disappeared from modern potlucks because bone-in chicken fell out of favor as people preferred boneless breasts. Cream-based casseroles became less popular, and packaged soup mixes were viewed as outdated shortcuts instead of clever time savers. Ground beef zucchini rice casserole was the 1980s church potluck summer casserole that used up backyard zucchini harvests when gardeners had more squash than they knew what to do with. Combining sliced zucchini with browned ground beef, rice, sauce, and shredded mozzarella into a hearty, budget-friendly, veggie-packed one-dish meal that fed crowds and used ingredients everyone already had in their kitchens. The recipe started by browning 1½ pounds of ground beef in a large skillet with diced onion and minced garlic, draining the fat, then adding 2 cups of cooked white rice, 2 cups of sliced zucchini cut into quarter-inch rounds, 1 15-ounce can of tomato sauce, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, half a teaspoon of garlic powder, salt and pepper, stirring everything together and letting it simmer for 5 minutes so the flavor. Moms then transferred the mixture to a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish, spread it evenly, topped it with 2 cups of shredded mozzarella cheese, covered the dish with foil, and baked at 375 degrees for 25 minutes, removing the foil for the last 5 minutes so the cheese melted and turned. The result was a hearty casserole that tasted like a deconstructed stuffed zucchini, with tender zucchini slices, savory ground beef, fluffy rice, tangy tomato sauce, and gooey melted cheese, all baked together into one satisfying. These 30 dump and bake casseroles prove that 1980s church potluck moms were absolute geniuses who fed entire congregations on shoestring budgets without spending hours in the kitchen. From funeral potatoes to strawberry pretzel jello salad, every single dish cost under $15, fed 15 to 20 people, and required just 10 minutes of prep time before the oven did. These weren't just recipes, they were survival strategies for working mothers, busy families, and tight church budgets during an era when homemade food still mattered and community meals brought people together every single week. These casseroles vanished not because they tasted bad or failed to satisfy, but because our culture shifted away from church potlucks, community gatherings, and the kind of cooking that prioritized feeding crowds over impressing food critics. We replaced cream of mushroom soup casseroles with artisanal grain bowls, Velveeta cheese dips with aged cheddar boards, and crockpot pulled pork with smoked brisket that costs 3 times as much and feeds half as many people. We lost something precious when we decided that dump and bake cooking was beneath us. We lost the ability to feed 15 people for $10 in 10 minutes, and we lost the recipes that built communities one potluck. But you can back. Every ingredient, from King's Hawaiian rolls to French onion soup mix to strawberry jello, still sits on grocery store shelves, waiting for someone to remember why these recipes mattered. Make funeral potatoes for your next family gathering. Bring taco casserole with Doritos to your off. Bake Texas sheet cake for your neighbors. Teach your children that cooking doesn't require culinary school or expensive ingredients. It requires community, creativity, and the willingness to dump ingredients into a pan and let the oven work. Which 1980s church potluck casserole surprised Did your mom or grandmother make any of these for fellowship dinners, family reunions, or Sunday suppers after church? Do you remember the taste of funeral potatoes, or the sweet, salty perfection of strawberry pretzel jello salad that made potluck tables feel home? Comment below with your state, the casserole that brought back memories, and any family stories about church potlucks during the 1980s when dump and bake cooking fed America 1/9 by 13 pan at a time. Hit subscribe so you never miss deep dives into forgotten recipes, vanished food traditions, and the casseroles that kept communities together before convenience replaced connection.